Throughout the 20th century, the science of comparative mythology has been characterized by an ever-increasing specialization and narrowing of interest. Unifying theories of myth are nowhere to be found. The so-called Saturn theory represents a notable exception in this regard. Proponents of the theory, including David Talbot and myself, have argued that extraordinary astronomical events in the relatively recent prehistorical period had a profound and formative influence on all primary institutions of human culture, including mythology, religion, language, monumental architecture, funerary practices, marriage ritual, cosmology, athletics, dance, and music. Stated this boldly, our historical reconstruction seems so ambitious as to inspire incredulity. Once the evidence is fully laid out, however, it speaks for itself. While it would be impossible to summarize a lifetime of research within a 10-minute presentation, we intend to use the next several videos to illustrate some of the most salient evidence supporting the theory. Interested viewers can turn to our manifold publications for additional information. The testimony of ancient religion is especially compelling. In ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, the principal gods are identified with celestial bodies. In the earliest strata of Mesopotamian Uruk, conventionally dated the last third of the 4th millennium BCE, it is the worship of the planet Venus as Inanna that predominates. So too at the dawn of history in Egypt, the leading god Horus is explicitly identified with the star. In our reconstruction, that star is Mars. And yet mainstream scholars rarely ask the all-important question as to why planetary bodies assumed this prominent role in the oldest religious texts. The evidence from the earliest written languages corroborates this picture. Writing was first invented in ancient Mesopotamia in the 4th millennium BCE, and the earliest script was pictographic in nature, i.e. the vast majority of the written signs were pictures of the object being described. For example, a foot signified a foot or to walk. In perfect keeping with our hypothesis the earliest gods were astronomical in nature, Sumerian scribes denoted the concept of God with an 8-pointed star. This is a so-called An sign. The earliest pictograph for Inanna Venus, in turn, depicted a comet-like object. Our theory and our theory alone can explain these facts. The first gods were identified with the most prominent celestial bodies, and the Queen of Heaven, as Venus, spent a portion of her early career as a comet-like body. The Saturn theory is most famous, perhaps, for the claim that a giant pillar-like structure formerly spanned the circumpolar heavens and seemingly linked together a number of nearby planets. Hence the name polar configuration coined by Talbot, a subject of much controversy over the decades. While it is well documented that mythological traditions of cultures around the globe celebrate a luminous world pillar in the sky, critics tend to be skeptical of the testimony from ancient myth. It is here that the evidence encoded in monumental architecture is especially instructive and difficult to explain away. Witness the towering pyramidal structures and ziggurats in Egypt and Mesopotamia that took thousands of people and multiple generations to construct. The ziggurat at Ur, for example, is estimated to have weighed several 100,000 tons. What could possibly have possessed the ancient sky watchers to erect these towering structures? What were they intended to represent? According to the terminology applied to the monumental structures by the builders themselves, the answer is patently obvious. The ziggurats represented the world mountain atop which the planetary gods lived, loved, and died. Thus it is that among the earliest Sumerian names for the ziggurat are Giant Mountain and Stairway to Heaven. And to whom were these first ziggurats constructed and devoted? To the aforementioned star gods Inanna Venus and An. The earliest ziggurats and pyramids, like sacred architecture everywhere, were specifically patterned upon the unique celestial configuration overhead in accordance with the prevailing philosophy of as above, so below. It stands to reason, accordingly, that early monumental structures will include a number of telltale architectural details that have no conceivable function or rationale in the present natural world, and point instead to unique features of the polar configuration. As a case in point, consider the massive set of shiny horns that formerly adorned the apex of early ziggurats. At the tail end of the 3rd millennium, King Gudea of Lagash could be found boasting of his ziggurat, quote, "One makes the house grow upwards like a mountain. makes it lift its horn like a bull. How on earth is it possible to explain this bizarre bovine imagery? For anyone familiar with the writings of Talbot and myself, the answer is obvious. The gigantic crescentine horns model the heaven-spanning crescent that formerly distinguished the polar configuration during one particularly memorable phase in its history. But you don't have to take our word for it. An archaic pictograph from China dating to the 3rd millennium BCE is believed to depict the mountain of the sun. While the image in question has no conceivable reference in the present sky, it illustrates perfectly a central claim of the Saturn theory, namely that a crescent formerly adorned the world mountain and served as the perch of the primordial sun god. Human institutions, not surprisingly, were indelibly impacted by the unique and awe-inspiring events associated with the polar configuration. The institution of kingship offers a perfect example. It will be remembered here that Sumerian tradition held that kingship had originally descended from heaven. Early kings in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Mesoamerica referred to themselves as the son of the land and modeled their behavior in accordance with the mythical behavior ascribed to the prototypical son. If the prototypical son engaged in sexual intercourse with the planet Venus, the Sumerian king made a public show of simulating sex with Inanna Venus in order to legitimize his hold on the throne and signal his own divinity. So, too, if the prototypical sun was said to have formerly appeared as a diminutive orb at the breast of Venus, the Sumerian king had himself depicted in monumental artworks as a babe at the breast of Inanna or Ishtar. If the prototypical sun fought apocalyptic wars against the powers of chaos, the kings of Sumer and Babylon purposely sought out barbarian hordes to vanquish. This while proclaiming that the warrior goddess Venus accompanied them at their side, protecting them from all harm and guaranteeing victory. The sacred garments of kings reveal the clear imprint of extraordinary astronomical events. Check out the royal garb of the Assyrian king. It is as if the king wrapped himself in iconic stellar images, namely those of the primordial sun and Venus. It will be noted that not one of these images has any recognizable counterpart in the current sky. In the earliest attested rituals of royal investiture, each and every detail of the king's regalia reflected the celestial original. The crown worn by the king, for example, was expressly modeled upon that worn by the prototypical sun at the time of beginning and is identifiable with the planet Venus. Thus it is that Sumerian hymns report that the ancient sun god tied on a moosh band as a crown, wherein the word moosh is the aforementioned comet-like pictograph denoting Inanna Venus. The local king, following a long tradition, tied on his moosh crown in imitation of the celestial prototype. Nearly 2,000 years later, Assyria's great king Esarhaddon reiterated this belief, claiming of Inanna Venus that, quote, "she guards me like the crown on my head." What is true in ancient Mesopotamia is also true in Egypt and Mesoamerica. There, too, the king tied on a headband crown carefully modeled upon the planet Venus. Thus it is that the Egyptian Seshed headband shows the same spiraling form and two flowing streamers as the Sumerian moosh sign. The word Seshed, as Talbot and I pointed out 30 years ago, means comet. Recall here the statement from a 3rd millennium Sumerian hymn quoted in our previous video, wherein the king invoked Venus as follows, quote, "The ever-sparkling lady gives me my kingship," end of quote. The word translated as ever-sparkling here is mul, to shine or radiate, a verb formed from the Sumerian word for star, mul, and hence referring to the luminous splendor of Venus itself. The clear import of this passage, accordingly, is that kingship is a gift of the planet Venus. Venus's profound influence on ancient conceptions of kingship is simply one of hundreds of archetypal mythological motifs that conventional scholarship has no answer for. Our historical reconstruction, on the other hand, explains the connection with an unrivaled elegance and logical rigor. Truth be told, in order to achieve a fact-based history of our solar system, it is sometimes necessary to ignore the strictures of modern science and pay careful heed to the testimony of ancient myth.